We are so blessed and honored and proud and appreciative to be here with you on Juneteenth 2023. This is our third annual Juneteenth Freedom Summit, and I'm going to start by introducing myself and also giving thanks to so many different groups of people who really made this possible. It's such a blessing to see all of you here today. Austin is experiencing a heat wave. In America, politically, we're experiencing a heat wave in so many different ways, and all of us are looking for relief. We are looking for sanctuary. We are looking for healing. We are looking for love and justice. We still are in search of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, even when we live in places that want to ban the words justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? So all of you are here today for very, very specific reasons. I'm very, very grateful for such a courageous turnout in these times. My name is Payne Joseph. And I am a professor of public affairs and history here at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm honored to be the holder of the Barbara Jordan Chair in Political Ethics and Values. Barbara Jordan is, for my money, really the most important and most morally centered Texan that we've ever had in the existence of this state of Texas. And it is her example, the example of Barbara Jordan, who wanted justice, she wanted fairness, she wanted equity. She refused to scapegoat anybody, whether they were Republicans, Democrats, rich, poor, black, white, Latinx, queer, straight, undocumented. She refused to scapegoat anybody. And she really called us towards a morally centered America where we could build that beloved community, not by marginalizing and scapegoating people who look different from us, people who are different religions, people who we felt were less than us, but by actually bringing us all together to build that beloved community, irrespective of race, irrespective of economic status, irrespective of religion and citizenship status. So in so many ways, it's her legacy that we all acknowledge today on this huge celebration of Juneteenth. The Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the University of Texas at the Lyndon Baines Johnson School for Public Affairs is a center whose mission is to promote engaged research and scholarship focused on the ways issues of race, democracy, and public policy impact the lives of global citizens. Through interdisciplinary scholarship, technological innovation, and public symposia, the center seeks to develop an interactive model of history that fosters a robust intellectual and civic dialogue on race relations, civil rights, law, international relations, and democracy at UT Austin and within the wider national political and policy landscape. More than that, what we seek to do is really provoke and ask profound questions related to the relationship between race, democracy, policy, and history in the United States and globally. And we're living in an era where we need to ask these questions more urgently than ever. As somebody who studies the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., these are the times that Dr. King called for the fierce urgency of now, 60 years ago. He talked about the fierce urgency of now. And what Dr. King meant by the fierce urgency of now was the need in our public dialogue, in our civil discourse, in our secular politics, but also in our religious and sectarian politics, to center humanity, to center justice, to center love in our policies, in our legislation, but also in our civic and political discourse. And in so many ways, Juneteenth is about that. I want to give thanks to those who helped us organize this summit. Thanks to the Dean of the LBJ School, J.R. DeShazo, who's right here. Want to acknowledge Dean DeShazo for being such a strong supporter of what we're trying to do here at the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. I want to thank the two of multiple partners that we have that are here with us today. Rosa Rebellion and Virginia Cumberbatch. Virginia, please stand. Rosa Rebellion, Virginia Cumberbatch. Virginia is a proud LBJ school grad, and she's somebody who's influencing so many different discourses around racial justice and healing and feminism and entrepreneurship in so many critical ways. I want to thank the Emancipator and Amber Payne, who's right here, the publisher of the Emancipator. And the Emancipator is growing out of the 2020 racial and political reckoning, and my friend Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and a partnership with the Boston Globe and now Boston University and the Emancipator. And that is really, and Amber's going to talk about this later, but really evoking the liberatory newspaper and journalistic practices coming out of the 18th and 19th century abolitionist movements and updating them for the 21st century. I want to thank the LBJ communications team, who always do such a fantastic job of spreading our message and supporting us on social media. I want to thank Shantae Thompson, the CSRD's Senior Program Administrator, for really doing so much 24/7 to make this and all the programming that we have possible. Thank you, Shantae. I don't know if Shantae is here. And our first panel is going to be a panel documenting our untold stories, the power of narrative. We have 3 different panels. Panel 2 is going to be disrupting systems not built for us. And finally, the third panel is determining a liberated future. And what we're trying to do with these discussions, especially at this specific time in American history and in the history of the state of Texas, is think about Juneteenth as a portal to discuss freedom beyond emancipation. And I'm going to say that again. When people are going to say, well, what are the lessons, what are the takeaways that we want from this conversation this afternoon? It's this idea of freedom beyond emancipation. And what do I mean by that? And how does that connect to public policy? How does that connect to higher education? How does that connect to democracy? Well, a freedom beyond emancipation is what inspires Juneteenth. Because when Major General Gordon Granger, as Yaqui Smith will school us on, came to the port of Galveston on June 17th, 1865, with 2,000 Union soldiers, he came to try to enforce a freedom that was already Black people's. And I'm going to say that again. He came to enforce a freedom that Black people already had, in the sense that they were human beings with actual dignity, and what they were looking for was citizenship, which is the external recognition of the God-given dignity we all already have. So when we think about Juneteenth and this idea of freedom beyond emancipation, what we're talking about is a freedom that, yes, is going to be legislated. Yes, we're going to get policy. Yes, we're going to get laws, but we have to recognize we inherently already have these freedoms. And the reason why we celebrate the ancestors who paved a way out of no way in Galveston, in Austin, in Houston, we think about Emancipation Park and the 10 acres that were purchased in 1872 by the 4 pillars and the different Black women and men and children who were connected to that. In so many different parts of Texas and the United States, people made a way out of no way by embracing multiracial democracy for the first time. So when we think about this idea of freedom beyond emancipation, what we're saying is a freedom that goes beyond just the external recognition of citizenship. Because the only way we can actually achieve true freedom is by recognizing whether somebody has a passport, whether somebody has a piece of paper that is acknowledging their humanity, every single person on the planet and in the state of Texas and in the city of Austin, at the University of Texas, has God-given dignity, and with that God-given dignity comes certain inalienable rights, no matter what a judge or a legislator or somebody who's high in power might say. That's the only way. Either we all have freedom or none of us have freedom. All right, that's just the introduction. So now we're gonna Now we're going to introduce our first three panelists, Amber Payne, Funmi Ogunro, and my friend Yaki Smith. Amber Payne is publisher, and as I introduce you, please take a seat. Amber Payne is publisher and general manager of the Emancipator. She was a 2021 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University, and I have to give Amber her props. The Nieman Fellow is the most prestigious fellowship in the world for journalists. So becoming a Nieman Fellow is not a little small thing. Amber formerly served as managing editor of BET.com, leading editorial and digital video strategy, executive producer of Teen Vogue and Them, and in 2015 launched NBC Black, a section of NBCnews.com dedicated to elevating the conversation around Black identity, social issues, and culture. Amber started her career at NBC Nightly News, producing breaking news and feature stories. Next up, Funmi Ogunro. Funmi Ogunro is a Nigerian-American Lone Star, Emmy-nominated film producer and editor. Funmi was a part of the editorial team for Fat Tuesdays, an Amazon original series. Funmi recently edited an award-winning documentary titled Parker, which premiered at Sundance 2023. Funmi has over 10 years of experience in non-scripted and scripted film and television, collaborating with major companies such as Amazon, PBS, YouTube. She was awarded a National Education Telecommunications Association Award for her work on the national TV series American Graduate, funded by the Corporation of Public Broadcasting and distributed on PBS. Funmi is currently developing a feature-length documentary about the history of Black freedom communities in Austin. And that is an extraordinary, extraordinary history, so I can't wait for that. And my colleague and friend, Professor Yaki Smith, who is blowing up like I thought you would. Remember, to paraphrase Biggie Smalls. Yaki Smith's films have received worldwide acclaim, screenings and winning awards at over 100 film festivals. His latest film is Juneteenth on Faith and Freedom, which is now being broadcast on over 335 PBS stations around the country. This is a profound documentary that found Yaki going to over 6 different cities in Texas and really uncovering the messier, more inspirational, deeper and grittier historical truth behind Juneteenth. And it's a film that has really captured the national imagination. I've written about the film in Texas Monthly and CNN.com. He's receiving really global acclaim for this film, and he's just getting started. So I'm really excited to have Yaki here. Some of the many laudits and plaudits, he has served as the inaugural Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Moody College of Communication, where he's currently a professor of film, and Variety magazine named him one of the best film educators in the world. Oh, they have one. Okay. Sometimes things go according to plan. Okay, so thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And you all are such wonderful creators and creatives. In terms of Juneteenth, and I'm going to just throw this out there to all of you as a panel, what aspect of Juneteenth gets your creative juices flowing? All of you are artists, but you're also educators who have messages and things you want to share with really global publics. But how can your work as artists, as amplifiers, spread a very specific story about Juneteenth? Because I think the very fact that the holiday is this is only the 3rd year, but obviously it's being celebrated for almost 160 years in Black communities, not just in Texas, but nationally. How does this inspire you, this holiday?
Well, I'll start. You know, I'm publisher of the Emancipator, The Emancipator, it's in the name, emancipation. And when we think about the Emancipator, we started to think about it in terms of emancipation from what? From misinformation, from bigotry, from hatred, from false narratives. And so that's kind of a foundation and a grounding of the Emancipator, this idea that there are these narratives that need to be corrected. There are these narratives that need to be shared. There are untold histories, and there are through lines in history that can help us, by looking back at the past, that can help us look at where we are now and how did we get here. You know, it's almost this ripple effect and this domino effect. And so I think that's where I approach it personally as a journalist, as a storyteller, and thinking about what kind of narratives. I mean, just Juneteenth itself, this idea of information being masked or hidden or the attempt to stifle growth and emancipation and freedom. And so I think we take that in our editorial approach. And one thing that we'll be able to share today is highlighting of a film from Funmi with that very topic. So I think that's what I feel like there's like a very true connection for the Emancipator to really recognize and honor Juneteenth. And in another piece that we published today, or re-amplified today, was a piece from scholar Kelly Carter Jackson, who talks about Lincoln didn't free the slaves freed themselves. And she breaks it down in a video commentary, exactly why. Evidence-based, historical, giving that history. And I think people need that history and context to really just be able to understand the present.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Amber, I love that. It's interesting because as someone who is from Texas and has always celebrated Juneteenth, the fact that it is now a federal holiday, in some ways for me, is good and bad, and I'm going to tell you why. The good thing about it is that now something that we've always known about here in Texas, something that we've always celebrated, a history that, to your point, in many ways was buried, has been exhumed, right? Yes, there have been Juneteenth celebrations across the nation for a while, but a lot of people, some people probably sitting in this room still don't really know what Juneteenth actually is, right? And we've been traveling with this film for the last few months, and I am actually still surprised at how many people don't really know the true history of Juneteenth, right? And so the fact that now we get to educate people about that, the fact that now the film can be used as a tool to really, again, exhume these histories, to start conversations about these histories, and to let everyone know that this is not just about Texas, and actually it's not just about Black people, it's about America in general, right? That's great. However, I think the reason I say it's good and bad is because there's also, for me, a co-opting of it that I think we have to be very, very careful of, right? That the moment that it becomes sort of on the national presence or in the national conversation, or becomes a part of the national conversation, then people start to take it and actually, in my opinion, pervert its meaning, right? It's not about selling T-shirts. It's not about everybody all of a sudden going to a cookout, right? And it's also not just about the celebration, because you said this earlier, if we stop at the celebration, in my opinion, we diminish what the holiday is actually about. This holiday is about resistance, right? This holiday is about people who, even though, I love that, the slaves freed themselves. I mean, there's an entire history, if and many people in this room know this, but entire history of resistance during slavery. People running away, right? People having rebellions on plantations. People really fighting against the institution that had them bound. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about. And then also understanding that we're still fighting for that absolute freedom that Gordon Granger came to the shores of Galveston to announce to the people that they actually had. And if we stop again at the celebration, which I sometimes think that we are, right, then I think we've lost the meaning of what the holiday is really about. And so my hope is that, and again, as I think about what Juneteenth means to me, it's about resistance, it's about continuing to fight, it's about remembering, right? But also looking back to know how to fight in the future, because the roadmap has already been given to us if we would really study these histories of how do we actually get the things that we need done. And so for me, that's what sort of keeps me going when I think of Juneteenth.
Thank you. Funmi.
Okay, I was making sure. So I agree and echo everything you just said, and you explained it so well. I'm from Austin, and I've been celebrating Juneteenth since I was a little kid. and my mom would do programming in East Austin. She has a nonprofit, and so every Juneteenth we were at the Carver Library celebrating Juneteenth. She had a storyteller there that would explain to us what Juneteenth meant. And I'm going to be honest, I kept getting confused each year. I was like maybe 8, 9, 10, because I was like, okay, wait, 1862. But then the general went to Galveston. So I was like a little kid, and I was just a little bit confused. I was like, wait, so were we free or not? But when I got into my teenage years, I kind of really got the idea. But when I was a little child, although I was celebrating, I didn't really know what I was celebrating. But I loved what we were doing. I loved being around family. I loved the spirit and energy. I loved being around Black folk. And I think all of that energy has inspired me as an artist. And growing up, or I didn't grow up in East Austin, which is the historic Black part of town, but my parents' businesses were there. And so celebrating Juneteenth in East Austin and just being around Black folk has inspired me as an artist and has inspired all my filmmaking. And I think some of that is one of the reasons why I'm so dedicated to telling the stories of Black people in freedom communities. And so as a filmmaker, it's just been that energy, the resistance, celebration has really just made me a better artist and just continues to inspire and motivate me every day.
Oh, that's great. One thing I want to talk about is, and ask you all about, is this idea of how should we be celebrating Juneteenth, in your minds? Because you've all raised questions which I think are true and profound about this idea of co-optation and something being taken over. Obviously, Texas had already had Juneteenth as a state holiday, but it's become a federal holiday. And it's a really complex time in 2023 because this is the 160th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And at the same time, with the recent anti-DEI legislation that has just passed, in certain ways, we have a state that is the birthplace of Juneteenth very, very proudly, and is also on the leading edge of a political backlash against all of us really acknowledging Juneteenth and the legacies of Juneteenth, both the beautiful and the bitter parts of that legacy. So how should we celebrate this? Is it something that we should be proud of, a moment of veneration? Is it a moment of shame? Is it something that is the true Independence Day of the United States that stands alongside of July 4th, but amplifies the message of July 4th because it's actually happening for at least groups of Black people in this context? How should we celebrate it? And especially, we know we live in a country that doesn't like celebrations that seem like homework, right? People, because you talked about the cookout, right? One thing I'll say is that Stokely Carmichael, who I've studied, Kwame Ture, who was a civil rights activist in the 60s and Black Power activist, one of the things he said he learned as an organizer in New York and Mississippi and Alabama and other places, you had to give people marching orders, he said, about where to meet, what to do, but he always told them where the after party was going to be at. And he was talking about demonstrations in the 1950s and 60s. He said, once I told people where the after party at, and he said he used to tell people, I might not be at the after party because I might be arrested, but there's going to be an after party, right? And he said that was a big part of his organizing, right? And I remember reading that and saying, boy, this is not what I expected. So this is to anybody, really.
Well, I think everyone should celebrate by watching your film. I grew up in Southern Maryland, and I really didn't grow up with a patriotic, like, rah-rah, 4th of July background at all. So I like the idea of kind of claiming Juneteenth as our time, reclaiming a holiday to commemorate. I feel like the word commemorate is in there, which sounds like kind of boring, like you're just, doing homework again, like you're saying. But I think there's a reverence, is what I'm saying. Like, the cookout with some reverence. And I mean, the way that I've been celebrating this weekend, we're here, I'm in from Boston. We stopped by the Black Makers Market, bought something from some Black-owned businesses. We stopped by the Carver Museum, patron there, and, meeting people, talking to people. And then we spent some time with the Origin Studio House Collective, who to support what they're trying to build in East Austin. So I think about rebuilding community and finding a way that's about supporting our community, whether it's Black businesses or Black creatives, and that's maybe my personal feeling about it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I echo a lot of that. I think it's important to celebrate, but to your point, it's also important to do the homework, right? And I think whenever you go to the parade or the picnic, I love it. I want to eat ribs just like everybody else, right? But I also want to make sure that as you're leaving that space, or even as you're at that space, that you are learning something, that you're leaving not only with marching orders, but I'm putting a book in your hand, or I'm putting a QR code in your hand that you can scan on your phone to take you to either a Wikipedia page or to take you somewhere where you can learn more about what Juneteenth is all about. I'd also say that, and you hit on this, I think the community building part is so important. I was speaking at Buda on Saturday, and there's the Antioch Village, which was their freedmen's town, which my understanding is in jeopardy of being, I think, destroyed. They're trying to figure out how to revitalize it, but also just figure out how to keep it going. And I think the thing is, something I learned in making this doc is that there were over 500 freedmen's towns in Texas. What I would say, and I haven't visited all of them either, we should be going to these places because they in many ways reflect that resistance that even after these individuals had spent nearly 250 years in bondage, that after, right, they were emancipated, they went out and they built schools, they built churches, they educated their people, they built homes, they talked to their people about finances, they talked to their people about, again, entrepreneurship. They built whole communities. And I think we need to go to these communities because I'm one of these people who believes that when you stand in a space that had that much umph in it, that the spirits of those people can speak to you. And I think we just need to go and visit these spaces and, reverence these spaces, but also make sure that these spaces are not being torn down. Because when you tear down that kind of history, you also tear down the story of resistance that Black people have had from the beginning of time, actually. And that's what that's all about. If we can destroy that, it's just like with the anti-DEI stuff. If we can destroy that, right? If we can destroy true history, then we can make you believe certain things about yourself. And so we got to exhume this history, we got to talk about it, and we got to reverence all these individuals. And also we got to make sure our kids know about this, right? And you know this too. It's like when you teach in a university, sometimes I get students, one, who've never had a Black professor before. Two, when I start to talk about certain histories, when you talk about prison industrial complex, when you talk about all these things, they're looking at you like, what are you saying? And you realize that it's not necessarily that they've never heard about it. It's that the history or the way in which they've been told the story has been manipulated and perverted because their parents have given them a revisionist history of a lot of these things or a different narrative that isn't a true narrative. And so I want to make sure that we're disrupting this stuff in second, third, and fourth grade so that when they come to me at 18, come to you at 18, 19, that we don't have to do all that extra work because it is hard. It is taxing, especially when you feel that push against you because in many ways, you're not just trying to give them history, but in many ways, you're pushing against something that their parents have given them. And that's hard for them because you're basically telling them that some of the things that mommy and daddy told you are not necessarily true. And I'm not calling your parents a liar, but what I'm saying is that the history that they told you is not true history, and maybe they didn't know. And so I just think it's important that we get these things in schools early, we talk about these things early, so that we can, again, build up this community of revolutionaries that we do not have to, in many ways, undoctrinate, because that's what we end up having to do.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
That's a great point, education. Just this week, we had an event at Pease Park, which is near the historic Clarksville Freedom Community. And that was an event that, it was a celebration, but we also educated people on Juneteenth. And we took on that labor because this is the work that we do. But we also had fun doing it, and we shared personal stories. We talked about our films. We talked about our film, and we talked about, what is a freedom community? How many freedom communities were in Austin? What parts of town were they located? And so I think through my work, it's important for me to educate people. And then as far as celebrating Juneteenth personally, and for anyone else, I think that it's important to educate, but I also think it's important just to exist and Black people to exist and just celebrate. If you just want to celebrate Juneteenth and have fun and have a cookout, that's great. If you do want to take on the work to educate people, that's also important. And so because I throw a lot of events, I think it's important for me to educate people. But I also just like to have fun and celebrate Juneteenth. And I've been doing it since I was a little kid, and it just brings me so much joy.
Well, I'll clap for that. The final question that I have, and then I'll open it up for any audience's questions, and then we'll switch to the next panel, is really one about you. You all are engaged in creating narratives, all of you. And to me, as a historian, as somebody who's very interested in policy and the histories of how history and social movements, but also democratic institutions from above and below shape politics and society, one of the things I'm very, very convinced about is the power of stories and storytelling. Like I am convinced that that's the most important thing that we all have. And so how can Juneteenth become part of a narrative that is part of a shared American identity in terms of how we think about democracy, how we think about citizenship, how we think about dignity? And I say that on purpose, a shared American identity, because so often Black history is marginalized and siloed and thought of as an aftermath, when obviously Black history has been at the leading edge, and Black folks of democratic transformation, at least in terms of multiracial democracy, during the history of this country. But so many people are resistant to that. Right, resistant to that, and that's part of the challenges we face. So what can we do? Because right now we are living in a post-consensus America. Like we are after the civil rights consensus of the 1960s that helped produce Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, but also helped produce, truthfully, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. Because one of the biggest unspoken benefits of the civil rights movement is how many white people were helped by the civil rights movement, right? How many queer people, how many disabled people, because once you have dignity and citizenship for Black people and you expand that racial caste system, everybody gets help, right? And gets more access. So what can you all do in your work to build a story that's so compelling that Americans really from all backgrounds are going to say, I see myself in this story?
Well, it starts with telling your own story. And Black people, we are not monolithic. I'm half Jamaican. My dad is white. My grandfather is from Texas and New Mexico. And so I have my history. I have an interesting history and backstory, and it's by digging into that and digging into my own personal family stories and even some of the politics around, my father's politics and his history and how he comes to think the way he does, has helped me to maybe resolve some things personally, but also to just understand, how do I talk to you about this issue? I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen so I can try to understand you better, because the work that I'm trying to do is to show how toxic racism impacts us all. It impacts Black and white people. It devastates all communities. And so it gets to that idea that you're saying that of raising all boats, if you will, lifting all boats, and the progress and the work that we can do. So I think for me, I wish it wasn't just the Juneteenth. Like so many things, it's not just Juneteenth that we need to think about. I think about Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, which does such an excellent job in showing how these issues drag down communities. Think about it if you want to buy a house somewhere and you're thinking, well, where are the good schools and where are the resources? Now you're paying a premium to live in that area, and that all stems back to what? Redlining, race covenants, and this idea of segregating and pushing out communities, which of course, like many major cities, like Austin, has that story. So to me, it's continuing to tell those stories and dig deeper. And the story of the Freedom Towns, when I met and talked to Funmi about the work she's been doing and this film that she's been making, to me, I had never heard of that, and it was just another layer to that story about this erasing communities and erasing stories. So I love that you are from here. You want to tell that story. That's your history and on your home turf. And so it's about letting the storytellers tell their story. You know, it's not that the document, hey, we do what we do. We do a good job, but we want people to be empowered to also speak up and to share their story, or to entrust us with helping them to tell their story. So I think that's a big part of it for me, that we need to get it out of this idea that there are only certain people who can share their stories or present their stories. Because if we have more of that, we have this more reflective community and a reflective understanding of who we are.
Thank you.
I want to respond. Thank you, Amber. I want to shout out Stephanie Lang here. Raise your hand, Stephanie. You're about to see her on the big screen. You're about to see her face on the big screen, but she is my collaborator. We're producers. We're both producing the film Austin Black Freedom Communities, and we're telling our stories. Stephanie is a 7th generation Austinite, and her mom is here. Shout out, Miss Diane A. Shout out, yes. And so with ties to Clarksville, and I'm from Austin, but my family's not from Austin. My mom is from Detroit, Michigan. Shout out Detroit. I love Detroit. And then my dad is from Nigeria, and they met actually here at UT. They both, well, my dad went to St. Edwards, my mom was at UT, but they met here, and then I have all these siblings and all that. And so I love telling Black stories. I love humanizing people. I remember I was talking to someone. I'm a film editor as well, so I get hired to edit different projects. And I remember somebody was telling me, like, do you get annoyed that producers sometimes just call you to edit, or only call you to edit Black films and Black projects? And I said, no, I see how somebody could get irritated, but I love telling Black stories. I love humanizing Black people, narrative and documentary, and that's my life's passion. And so my duty is to continue to tell Black stories in all different forms, continue to collaborate with people within my community to create great work, like Stephanie. And we're working on many different projects, and I'm excited to share what we did for the Emancipator today. So, yeah.
So to answer this question, I need to invoke the spirit of Prophet James Baldwin. And I just want to read a quote from him. And he says, an artist is a sort of emotional or spiritual historian. His role, his or her, he said his, but I'm going to say his or her, role is to make you realize the doom and glory of knowing who you are and what you are. He has to tell, because nobody else can tell, what it is like to be alive. And when I think of that, there's several things that come to mind. First, not only do we have to tell our own stories, but I think we have to own our own stories, right? And I say that because I think sometimes it's very uncomfortable to have this conversation about Juneteenth. Let me tell you why. Because on one hand, we're here to celebrate the emancipation of people, but the question becomes emancipated from what, right? And I think oftentimes we don't have that discussion enough. We got to talk about what was slavery like here in Texas? What was the horror of slavery? And then who, in fact, played a part in that, right? Who, in fact, enacted those horrors on those Black people that were on those plantations. Now, obviously, I am a descendant of those that were emancipated, but there is somebody in this room who is a descendant of those who actually had me enslaved. And I think in order for us to really move forward, we got to tell those true stories. And it's uncomfortable, but let's just talk about it. What does it mean? No, you didn't do anything to me personally. I'm not blaming you for anything, but we also can't deny that there are privileges that come with the fact that you may come from that lineage, and then there may not be privileges that I don't possess because I came from that other lineage, right? And if we can start to have that conversation, then we can actually move forward. And I say that because when I think about the types of films that I make and what I want to do as a filmmaker, is I want to tell the whole truth. Because the truth, as we know, you've heard it many times, will set us all free, right? And I think as a storyteller, it's important that you not only, have people leave the theater, they're celebrating, they feel good, but you got to challenge folks, right? You have to make people want to ask more questions. You have to make people look inside themselves and look in the mirror and say, again, what part did I play in the matter? Because if we don't do that, then we're all going to hold hands, smile, dance, eat the ribs, but nothing will ever get done after that, right? So for me, storytelling is about telling the truth so that we can all figure out what a blueprint looks like in order to move forward,
Thank you. Thank you. I think with the time that we have left, because we're going to have a musical interlude between the first and the second panels. Any questions from the audience? Any questions?
So this is a conversation that we've been having at work. And so this is a conversation that we've been having at work. And as a person not of color, how do I best advocate? While I may have some shared experiences, I can't know what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. And so with that understanding, how do I advocate better?
I think fight alongside me, right? And what I mean by that is I think the term allyship being an ally became very popular, right? And while I respect that term, right, the other term that comes out of that is being a co-conspirator, right? And for me, that's the more powerful word, right? That's the more powerful active phrase. And what that means for me is that not only do you fight alongside me, but sometimes you may have to fight a battle that I can't fight for myself. And this is what I mean by that. And we know this. Sometimes, I was the associate dean for 3 years. There are certain rooms that I might say something in that is not received well, but my white counterpart might say the same exact thing, and actually now all of a sudden people are listening. And I think sometimes that's what we need. It's not that I need you to speak for me, but sometimes I may need to sit back and not have to be the one in the room fighting that battle, right? Because you can talk to your people in a different way than I can talk to them because they'll listen to you. And so for me, it's like, find out what my needs are. Don't speak for me, but find out how I need you to fight alongside me, fight with me, and sometimes even fight for me in rooms that I can't fight for myself. And I think, again, if we can all get on one accord with that, again, so much stuff can happen. So much progress can be made.
So how are we doing for, Shante, how are we doing for time? Are we between now and the next panel? Last question. Last question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I had a question because I appreciate the inclusion part that you mentioned, and each person telling their lineage, their story on how they got here. My question is, are there any platforms or any on the table opportunities for both sides to come together to have those conversations and discussions? Are there any formalized, I know there are think tanks behind different issues and legislatures and what have you, but are there any actual formal opportunities for everyone to have those conversations that you know about?
Well, I think it depends on who you're talking about. I think if it comes to people who are parts of political parties, there are definitely different platforms and different groups, including the No Labels group and other groups that are interested in that kind of dialogue. But then there's also sort of an intra-community dialogue with different sides within Black and Brown and other communities, where I think it's been more difficult getting people to the table in that sense, especially I think in the context of 2020 and what's happened to all of us since 2020, because people have become much more entrenched in how they feel, whether that might be on a slate of different issues connected to race, class, gender, sexuality, indigeneity, just so many different things. And it's hard to get people to speak. So I think there's multiple, but if you're talking about just the political divide, I do think that there are platforms being created.
I'll just add that you may want to think about, well, what am I interested in? Okay, I care about criminal justice or criminal legal reform or health equity or climate justice. And there are groups and there are people working to solve those, grassroots style. I mean, we have been doing something called solution circles. We did a solution circle for Black and Brown breastfeeding moms in the Boston area, and we brought them together to listen to them and to hear about what the challenges were and what they thought the solutions were. And, you know, it was mainly Black and Brown women in the room, and some of them were providers and some of them were moms, and they all left with kind of ideas as to how can I help or help my people. We want to do more of those, and you know, I think maybe that's an idea we have that pairs, you know, editorial information. You know, we did a series on Black maternal health with actual just real people together. You know, we're not running it. Y'all talk about it, and what are you really thinking and feeling? So I know we think of it as this big problem to solve, and I think of it personally as, you know, there are little aspects. They're all interconnected and they're all interwoven. It's all equity across the board. It's all this big fabric. So that may be one thing. I don't know if that exists in other forums. I know that's something that we're trying out.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Let's give a warm round of applause for this panel.